Meet Gregory Scarpa. To his neighbors, he was a well-dressed family man. To the FBI, he was a top echelon informant. But to the unfortunate souls who crossed the Colombo crime family, he was known simply as the Grim Reaper. For over 30 years, Scarpa was the chief enforcer and a high-ranking capo regime for the Colombos. When the family needed a problem erased, Scarpa was the eraser. He was a killing machine. While the exact number of his victims is lost to history, law enforcement estimates Scarpa personally murdered anywhere from 50 to well over 100 people. He famously boasted that he stopped counting once he hit 50. His methodology was defined by ruthless efficiency and sheer terror. He preferred firearms, shooting victims in broad daylight, but he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty with garrotes or brutal beatings. Scarpa's power and guile were legendary. He would even leave the biblical number of the beast, 666, on the pagers of his targets to let them know the Reaper was coming. But Scarpa had a terrifying secret. Since the early 1960s, he had a get-out-of-jail-free card. He was feeding information to the FBI. The Bureau valued his brutal tactics so much that in 1964, during the infamous Mississippi burning case, the FBI actually flew Scarpa down south. They allegedly handed him a gun, pointed him at a local Ku Klux Klan member, and let Scarpa do what he did best. After shoving a gun barrel down the Klansman's throat, Scarpa got the location of the missing civil rights workers' bodies in minutes. For decades, Scarpa lived a charmed, triple life, seemingly untouchable. But the Reaper could only outrun his own karma for so long. By 1992, during a bloody Colombo family civil war, the feds finally had enough. Scarpa was arrested and charged with 3 murders and a slew of conspiracies. In 1993, he pled guilty. But it wasn't a rival mobster's bullet or the electric chair that took out the Grim Reaper. It was his own paranoia that led to a truly horrific, agonizing demise. In 1986, years before his final arrest, Scarpa required surgery for bleeding ulcers. Because of his intense paranoia and fear of the outside world, he flatly refused to receive blood from the hospital's blood bank. He was terrified of catching a disease from a stranger. Instead, he demanded that the blood come only from the people he trusted, his own Mafia associates. In a twist of cruel, cinematic irony, one of the mobsters who donated blood to Scarpa, a man named Paul Mille, was unknowingly infected with HIV. The toughest killer in New York had signed his own death warrant. The disease quickly progressed to AIDS. Behind the walls of a federal medical prison in Rochester, Minnesota, the fearsome Grim Reaper withered away. The sickness ravaged his body, stripping him of his muscle, his strength, and his mind. He spent his final months as a frail, skeletal shell of his former self, suffering from severe dementia, blindness, and infections, suffocating in a slow, brutal agony. Roy DeMeo was a high-earning associate and later the most feared made man, operating within the notorious Gambino crime family under capo Anthony Nino Gaggi. While most mobsters in his era specialized in gambling, loan sharking, or hijacking, Roy's primary commodity was absolute death. Between 1973 and 1983, he assembled what became known as the DeMeo Crew, a tight-knit pack of sociopaths operating out of the Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn. They were responsible for a staggering wave of disappearances across New York. While official convictions fall short of the true horror, the FBI and underworld informants attribute anywhere from 70 to well over 200 murders to DeMeo and his loyal crew. What made Roy DeMeo particularly terrifying wasn't just the sheer volume of his victims, but the clinical, horrific efficiency of how he operated. He developed a system designed to ensure a body was never found, leaning heavily on the Mafia rule of no body, no crime. The victim would be casually invited into the back apartment of the Gemini Lounge. The moment they stepped through the door, a crew member would immediately shoot them in the head with a silenced pistol. In a synchronized, chilling routine, another member would rush forward to wrap a towel around the victim's head to contain the mess, while a third would simultaneously stab the victim directly in the heart to stop the blood from pumping to the extremities. From there, the body was dragged into a nearby bathtub, completely stripped, and professionally dismembered. The parts were then packed tightly into cardboard boxes and driven to the Fountain Avenue dump, where they were buried deep under thousands of tons of New York City garbage. By the early 1980s, the walls began to close in. Roy DeMeo had become an undeniable liability to the mob. He was erratic, deeply paranoid, and under intense FBI surveillance. The Gambino boss at the time, Paul Castellano, grew terrified that Roy might become an informant if faced with a massive life sentence. Castellano ordered a hit on his own top earner. But there was a glaring problem. Roy was so utterly dangerous and heavily armed that even the most seasoned hitmen were terrified to approach him. Eventually, the task fell to the only people who could get close to him, his own loyal crew, the very men he had trained to be butchers. On January 10, 1983, Roy DeMeo went to a meeting at a crew member's home. He never came out. 10 days later, on a bitterly frigid January afternoon, police discovered Roy's 1979 Cadillac Coupe de Ville parked suspiciously in the lot of the Varuna Boat Club in Brooklyn. When they finally popped the trunk, they found a scene that felt like a macabre, twisted parody of Roy's own dark work. Roy was found face down, huddled in a tight fetal position. He had been executed, shot multiple times in the head, and once directly through the hand, a defensive wound proving that in his final moments, the butcher knew exactly what was coming. Because of the brutal New York winter, his body had partially frozen solid to the inside of the trunk. Investigators couldn't even remove him at the scene. They had to tow the entire vehicle to a heated garage and wait for the dead hitman to thaw slightly before they could properly extract him and perform an autopsy. If you enjoyed the video or want a part 2, press the like button. If you didn't, go f*** yourself. But what you should definitely do is watch this video over here and subscribe.